Hi, I'm Luke. A reading from the Holy Gospel of Luke. The tax collectors and the sinners were all seeking the company of Jesus to hear what he had to say. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained. "This man," they said, "welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he spoke this parable to them. A man had 2 sons. The younger said to his father, "Father, let me have the share of the estate that would come to me." So the father divided the property between them. A few days later, the younger son got together everything he had and left for a distant country, where he squandered his money on a life of debauchery. When he had spent it all, that country experienced a severe famine, and now he began to feel the pinch. So he hired himself out to one of the local inhabitants, who put him on his farm to feed the pigs. And he would willingly have filled his belly with the husks the pigs were eating, but no one offered him anything. Then he came to his senses and said, "How many of my father's paid servants have more food than they want? And here am I dying of hunger. I will leave this place and go to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me instead as one of your paid servants.' So he left the place and went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with pity. He ran to the boy, clasped him in his arms and kissed him. Then his son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the calf we have been fattening and kill it. We are going to have a feast, a celebration, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now the eldest son was out in the fields, and on his way back, as he drew near the house, he could hear music and dancing. Calling one of the servants, he asked what it was all about. 'Your brother has come back,' replied the servant, 'and your father has killed the calf we had fattened, because he has got him back safe and sound.' He was angry then and refused to go in. And his father came out to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have slaved for you and never once disobeyed your orders. Yet you never offered me so much as a kid for me to celebrate with my friends. But for this son of yours, when he comes back after swallowing up your property, he and his women, you kill the calf we had been fattening.' The father said, 'My son, you are with me always, and all I have is yours. But it is only right we should celebrate and rejoice, because your brother here was dead and has come to life. He was lost and is found.'" In this week's Gospel of Luke, we hear Jesus tell the well-known parable of the prodigal son. He tells this story in response to comments made by some of the nearby scribes and Pharisees, who were vying, along with the tax collectors and so-called sinners, for the company and attention of Jesus at the time. Noticing that Jesus did not discriminate against who he spent time with, the scribes and Pharisees began to complain. "This man," they said, "welcomes sinners and eats with them." Indeed, we know through the scriptures that Jesus actively sought out the company of people whom the rest of society had marginalised. So the scene of the parable is set. A father with 2 sons, one older who appears to be faithful, obedient, loyal and hard-working, and then the younger son who wants his inheritance now. When he gets it, the parable tells us he then left for a distant country where he squandered his money on a life of debauchery. When the younger son stumbles upon hard times, he has an awakening and returns home to the father. The father, loving, compassionate and merciful, runs to the boy and embraces him with joy and demands a celebration. For a long time, I thought that this was the main premise of the whole parable. Don't waste your life away. Try not to be like the younger son. But if you do, that God the Father, ever loving, ever merciful, is always ready to forgive. And indeed, this is true. But what captures my attention now in this passage is the final scene or interaction between the father and the older son. Because it was in response to the scribes and Pharisees complaining that Jesus told this parable in the first place. In much the same way as the judgmental and complaining scribes and Pharisees, we see the older son refuse to attend the celebration for his brother. In the end, he even goes so far as to reveal his resentment for having slaved for his father all these years. What this scene causes me to feel is a deep sense of humility. Humility in response to all the times I've perhaps thought of Christianity or my faith in the past as a win-lose system, a reward-punishment system of rights and wrongs and who is in and who is out. And just what a waste of time and energy such a vision of God and life this was. Instead, what I now believe God is revealing to me in this passage is a deeper understanding of not only who God is, but of who we are called to be and why. For me, the fruit of such understanding is the true revelation of its worth, and that fruit is liberation. This season of Lent, traditionally marked by fasting or almsgiving, we may want to give up things that, like the younger son in the parable, draw us away from God and a more virtuous life. But equally important, yet often much harder to give up, is the insidious need to judge, or our very human need to even exist inside systems where we can pit one against another. To reduce Christianity to such dualism is to miss the point of this parable and indeed Jesus' entire mission. Too many times in our own personal lives and the history of our faith, we have probably all seen the divisive effect of making Christianity a contest of who is doing it right and who is doing it wrong, including ostracizing and judging those of other faith backgrounds or those of no faith background at all. Even the judgmental attitudes that exist inside of Christianity itself. Now, more than ever, I believe Christ's revelation through this parable is essential to unity in what has often become a more divided world. At the same time we can see an evolution towards a more united world, we can also see the push back into division, tribalism, and an us versus them view of the world. We see this on an international level between nations, within nations divided on issues, in the mass media, and even closer to home within our own personal circles, where social media often thrives and flourishes upon the divided opinions of people. Such a revelation also invites us to delve more deeply into the paschal mystery of Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection. Ultimately, what do we have to gain by the judgment and condemnation of others, especially when we are all imperfect and in need of the grace of God? In the end, we are all simultaneously both the younger brother and the older brother, guilty of wrongdoing and guilty of self-righteous judgment. The Paschal Mystery invites us to explore our own lives, to die to self and our own ego, yet all the while trusting in our loving God who calls us forward into new life. So this Lent, I hope to live differently by remembering what is my business and what is God's business. Following the example of our Saviour, by trying to live a virtuous, loving life is a reward in itself. I can't or don't deserve anything more or above anyone else. And that I certainly don't need to feel more right by making anyone else more wrong.